There are moments in life when we know right then this matters. This will change the course of how one experiences life. The afternoon of Wednesday, January 6th, will be one of those moments. As a minister, my role today is not to tell you the news. I suspect most of us have already watched and read plenty of news this week. Rather, I understand my role is helping us to make meaning of what has happened, of what is happening. It is to lift up the events of the day and to ask what matters here when measured against ultimate concerns. Ultimate concerns is a phrase central to the work of 20th century theologian Paul Tillich. Born in 1886, Tillich spent his first 4 decades in Germany as a pastor and scholar before his liberalism and his criticisms of the Nazis forced his relocation to the U.S., where he would teach until his death in 1965. Tillich understood theology not as the study of God narrowly defined, but as the careful consideration of what matters most to us, of our ultimate concerns. These concerns, these ultimate concerns, are, after all, what constitute our very being. They are the metric by which we measure the meaning of our lives. Of course, pointing to our ultimate concerns does not get us anywhere if we do not know what they are. As a Christian, Tillich would point to the Christian scriptures and the Christian tradition to name the ultimate concerns. But what matters ultimately to us as Unitarian Universalists, to us at First Parish, to each of us individually? At First Parish, our covenant functions to teach and remind us of our congregational ultimate concerns. With open minds and loving hearts, we gather to search for meaning, to care for one another, and to work together for a better world. These words are the measuring stick of who we are as a congregation. What matters to us? Our minds open to questions to inquiry, interactions with one another shaped by an attitude of love, searching for, rather than simply inheriting, meaning and understandings of truth, cultivating compassion for others by committing to care for others. If we cannot belong fully if we only care for and about ourselves. This is why when we imagine a better world, we work together to build it. At First Parish and as Unitarian Universalists, we do not measure our community by adherence to orthodoxy. We do not measure our community by adherence to perfect action, correct interpretation, or right belief. We measure our community by openness, by love, by shared engagement and caring for others and our shared world. These are our ultimate concerns as a congregation. And for many of us, they also reflect our ultimate concerns as individuals, which is why we're here as part of this community. How then might we take the measure of this week's events against these ultimate concerns of openness, love, and a shared project of a better world? Perhaps a place to start might be to consider the ultimate concerns embodied within the soaring marble and granite of the Capitol building. More than just a building, this building, whose cornerstone was laid in 1793 by President George Washington, tells a story about who we are as a nation. The design emerged from a call for ideas that led to the plan of a central dome flanked by two chambers, one for the Senate and one for the House. Delays and underfunding plagued construction and building use for the first 2 decades. When the Capitol was set on fire in the War of 1812, only a sudden rainstorm prevented its complete destruction. When construction resumed, the building and grounds were finally completed in 1829, more than 35 years after that cornerstone. When the size of Congress exceeded that first initial building, another design contest was held. As the building expanded, marble from Lee, Massachusetts formed the new veneer. By 1857, the House met in their new chamber, and in 1859, the Senate began to meet in theirs. The old House chamber of the original building would soon be designated as National Statuary Hall. While the National Statuary Hall itself only holds 35 statues, the full Statuary Hall collection is comprised of 100 statues, 2 from each of the 50 states. Each state places 2 symbols of their contribution to our shared national project into the collection. In this way, this hall and this collection of statues that expands throughout the Capitol complex are not simply blocks of marble and bronze, but intentional monuments to who we are, clues to and statements of our national ultimate concerns. What you may not know is that in the National Statuary Hall, there are also 2 statues that were part of the original design as the chamber for the House of Representatives. One statue is the Liberty and the Eagle, which is comprised of a massive 13-foot, 7-inch Lady of Liberty, who firmly grasped the Constitution in one hand. With the lady flanked on one side by a powerful eagle with wings arched open, and on the other side by the serpent of wisdom coiled around a column. The symbols of the liberty and eagle convey the ultimate concerns of the fledgling government: to powerfully govern in the service of liberty with the aid of wisdom by the rule of law established in the Constitution. This hall is one of the places in the Capitol that the mob entered on Wednesday. Let us watch.
I can respect it.
What is the meaning of this action? How do we take its measure? Later in the video, you can hear a woman shout, "I've never been in this house, how about you? You bleepin' own it." To which another woman fiercely affirms, "That's right, we own it." And yet, to whom does the hall, the Capitol, the government belong? What are the measures of that belonging? Above the doorway through which the insurgents march in the video, you can just make out a clock and a statue. This is the other statue that sat in that first Hall of Representatives. Entitled "The Car of History," The statue is of Clio, the muse of history, riding on a chariot or car that represents the passage of time, a time that moves and does not stop. Looking back, we can see the current of time challenging the founding myths of an equality that was far from full or just. As time passes, we witness the emancipation of enslaved persons, the suffrage of women, the immigration of millions from every corner of the globe, the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the legalization of same-sex marriage, and more. As time passes, belonging expands, becoming more inclusive, more just. The struggle for this more perfect, equitable, and just union once erupted into war. A war whose flag of rebellion never flew in the Capitol until this week. This struggle has also been fought through an unmeasurable volume of words, protests, and other activism and legislation to make this shared government, this shared house, actually serve the interest of more and more people in this nation. And yet, days such as Wednesday force us to confront that the dream of a more perfect union in which people are created equal is far from real. As many have noted, had the mob not been primarily white, but comprised rather of black or brown skin, the police preparations and responses would have been very, very different. Amidst the strides for equality in our nation, there is a pugnacious and malicious ugliness residing here too. In her poem, Good Bones, Maggie Smith confesses all the ugly she would keep from her children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. The events this week showed a particular kind of terrible many of us never imagined witnessing in our lives. Nor did we imagine that on the same day, nearly 4,000 lives would be lost to a disease whose names we did not even know 12 months ago. Nor that we would barely even notice these deaths on that day, that number, because such thousands of deaths have been happening for weeks and months. In the face of all this, the insurrection, the pandemic, the persistent racism and assumptions of white supremacy in our culture, we are called to not only read or watch the news, but to also stop and ask, what is the meaning of this? What is our ultimate concern in all of this? Smith concludes her poem by writing, "Any decent realtor walking you through a real dump chirps on about Good Bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful." The architecture of the Capitol building has developed, decayed, expanded, and been repaired for 227 years. At times, the Capitol has indeed been a real dump of a building. And yes, the state of our government and our nation has too often been a real dump too. And I note that I'm using a more church-friendly term here than the original word the poet uses in her text. The world, our nation, our police departments, our governments can be terrible, especially for people who cannot walk the streets or the halls with the confidence and protection of whiteness. But could it not also be true that there could be beauty here? Could we not make this place more beautiful? There is no backing away from the ugliness of this week. And yes, we would certainly want to keep the ugliness from our children and our children's children. But the truth is, we live in a world that is full of both the terrible and the ugly, the beautiful and the good. Here in this community, this mix is the truth that we teach our children and remind ourselves every time we engage in the ritual of joys and sorrows. We are not a religious tradition that would close our minds or our hearts to the terrible or the ugly. Rather, we are a religious tradition that openly considers the truth of who we are and yet holds on to the hope of making something beautiful here. We are, as the Reverend Teresa Soto writes, the people who return to love like the North Star and to the truth that we are greater together than we are alone. Let these statements of what really matters to us be the measure of our lives and the guide for how we might live. Holding these as our metric will not eradicate or even hide all the terrible in the world, but it will keep us connected to what is beautiful in this world. No matter what may crash and burn around us, may we not cease taking the measure of what really matters. May we not stop holding fast to our ultimate concerns. May we never stop holding on to the love of others and to the truth that we are better together than we are alone.